The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, hexes, curses, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep from listening to this podcast.
This is the 100th episode of the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Max George.
And I'm Nathaniel Darkish.
My name is Legion, for we are a podcast. Woo-woo! Nathaniel, 100 episodes.
It's taken us long enough.
Seriously, I will look at other podcasts and they hit 100 in like a few months and I feel a little self-conscious.
Or, even like 2 years, but it's fine. It's just like year 6.
Yeah, I'm super proud of us for even getting this far. This is definitely a hobby for both of us. We're not paid to do this. It's a time for two best friends to just shoot the shit and talk about our favorite thing.
And currently is working at a loss still, but it's fine. I really do love doing this podcast, partially because I get to hang out with you virtually, which is always a treasure.
I am a treasure, thank you.
But you're welcome. And also just we've got to meet so many awesome people. We have had some incredible guests. I was looking through a couple of days ago, and just like the list of people that we've had as guests is so long. So I'm not going to even try to rattle off all the names, because there's like 60 people who have been so kind as to be on our podcast. Let's just suffice it to say there's a ton of you, and everyone who's ever been on the podcast, thank you. And anyone who's willing to join us in the future, we thank you in advance.
Yeah, I think that's the greatest thing out of this podcast, other than, of course, hanging with my bestie, has been connecting with the horror community and learning about all of these spooky stories that all of us share, meeting our awesome guests from, film industry, authors, other podcasters, TikTokers. We have kind of created this ubiquitous little group of Scream knights and ladies and dukes and earls and whatever we call them. It's been awesome. I am quite proud of what we've accomplished, Nathaniel.
And I'm also just so pleased with all of the people who are willing to listen and willing to spend some time with us every few weeks to listen to whatever we've got, whatever spooky stuff we have cooked up for each episode.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this idea that horror is something really cathartic for a lot of us. For me, it's nice to watch a film that is more scary than my actual life sometimes. But it has opened up so many doors. We've heard so many stories, spooky scares. It really makes me appreciative for our ability to connect with others on this kind of a level. And at the end of the day, this is just super fun. It's something that you and I both really adore and love, whether we're talking about books or the horror movies that we love, podcasts,
TV shows, video games, real life stuff.
Anything. It's just something that has connected us with so many people, and the people really are what have kept us going in some capacity. I think you and I enjoy this enough, but it's really fun, and I'm most edified when we're talking to others and really just connecting on that humanistic level that is hard to describe. I'm getting a little emotional here, so I'm going to pass the baton back to you.
I'll just say we love you all of our listeners. Thank you for being with us on this 100 episode journey over the last nearly 6 years.
Yes.
And we will keep going strong. We've already got our next couple of episodes lined up. We have more guests ready to rock. This is just the beginning of more greatness to come.
Absolutely. And you and I kind of racked our brains for a real long time about what do we do for the 100th episode. We have had plenty of guests on the show. We've done our silly little, horror movie Academy Awards. excuse me, we've done a lot, and we weren't quite sure where to take it. But you and I put our brains together and decided that we finally do something that we've been wanting to do for a real long time.
Yes.
And that is the Night of 100 Exorcisms, or the Exorcism Extravaganza. Basically, we're going to talk all things possession, which I am very excited for because this is my jam.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this is kind of the culmination of a lot of the things that we do best with this podcast. One, we tend to really enjoy a lot of films that deal with the demonic and possession and things like that. Those are some of our favorites to discuss. But then also, like, we love to bring in real belief systems, real folklore, the occult, and religion into our conversations. And so what better way to do that than kind of looking at how exorcism and beliefs around the demonic or spirit possession or things of that ilk influence people all over the world. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to explore a lot of different religions and how they perform exorcism rituals, if they do, what they look like, what does it mean to be possessed, all of that kind of stuff in, yes, a full-blown extravaganza format.
Yeah, we've broken down kind of major cultures and separated them between the two of us. And we're just going to talk about what possession and exorcism looks like in each one of those cultures. Really kind of dive into those backgrounds and how they're different from each other, but also how they're very similar to one another. Mm-hmm. It's interesting as a fan of the occult, but also a horror movie fan, that when we watch possession films, demonic films, they're very Eurocentric, very focused on the Catholic rite, which is fine. It's great, makes for great movies. But there's so much more to exorcism and possession, and it's been around for a real long time. So something I'm quite passionate about. Anyone who knows me knows that I have like a top 5 list of favorite demons, which is not something usually people have. This is my jam. Quite excited for it.
Yeah,
so,
if you look at a certain like section of Max's house, you'll immediately understand just how enthusiastic he is about all of this.
Yeah, it probably scares a few people away, but if it's scaring you away, then maybe I don't want you in my house in the first place.
That's true. It's the way of exorcising those people from your life.
I love it. I'm using that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's kind of start at the beginning. It's a good place to start, as we all know that song. Exorcism, Nathaniel. When you hear that word, without kind of diving into your author background and all of that, what would you tell someone, who has zero concept of exorcism? What is it to you?
It basically is the idea that a person is being partially controlled or inhabited by something evil. Usually it's something that is, something that is unseen, and that there is some sort of rite or ritual to get that evil entity out of the person.
Yeah, awesome. When I looked it up online, very similar. Essentially says the expulsion or attempted expulsion, which is interesting, of a supposed spirit from a person or place. I really like this definition because, something that catches my eye as a, amateur quote-unquote demonologist, occultist, is this idea of evil. This definition I found does not indicate any sort of good or evil spirit. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important here because a lot of different cultures may not necessarily think of exorcism as something that is fighting against evil per se. Rather, there's some unwanted spirit, whether it is a demon or in some cultures an undead relative, or in others a djinn who might have mischievous intent, but not really this inhumane spirit trying to rip a soul out and to drag it to hell, Yeah. That opens up this whole, dialogue, of course, about what is evil and, you and I both come from that Judeo-Christian background, so we think evil as demonic. But I like this idea that an exorcism isn't always necessarily you have this person who's possessed by an infernal being and you're trying to, save the day. You can look at a house blessing, saging your house as a type of exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an energy or a negativity in that house, you are, expulsing. I'm not sure if that's the word.
Expelling.
There we go. An energy or a spirit from the house. The same with like a poltergeist, a ghost. It's really interesting. I think our culture in the United States definitely thinks of exorcism and goes straight to Satan and Beelzebub and Legion and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts there?
No, I definitely agree, and I definitely, as I've done research to prepare for this episode, and as I've just, been a fan of horror, and just, had a general interest in studying belief systems and faiths and all of that, I do find it really interesting that it is so nuanced, that the idea of exorcism doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one connection with a lot of these different belief systems, but still fundamentally we have a lot of these key ideas present. And so I'm going to get into some stuff, for example, in the Japanese Shinto religion that is kind of more along the lines of a house blessing than it is casting a spirit out of somebody or a demon out of somebody. So it's really fascinating to see all of the ways that this kind of manifests in these different belief systems.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, what has happened is the good old American satanic panic. You and I have talked about this quite often on the podcast because it's really where a lot of big horror kind of themes were generated.
Mm-hmm.
And it really defined quite a bit of our modern horror experience. We all know the good old Anton LaVey. He's kind of the father of modern Satanism. And again, Satanism is something much more beautiful and complex than the world wants to believe it. Go check out their website. You'll be surprised by their commandments and tenets and idea of what the world is supposed to be. That's my little soapbox. But you can't publish something called the Satanic Bible in 1969, wink, wink, and not make some waves, right?
Yeah.
Of course, this Bible is not the only thing that really set America into a tizzy. The Exorcist, really, it's interesting that a lot of the satanic panic, the fulcrum is The Exorcist, which came out in 1973, just 4 years after the Satanic Bible was published. A lot of our idea of Ouija boards and all of that also come from The Exorcist. This movie is so groundbreaking in terms of the horror world. It really shaped a lot of horror culture in the United States.
Yeah, The novel broke some ground, and then the movie just shattered the ground into a gazillion pieces.
Yeah, I mean, the novel is phenomenal. I've read it, and I think, going to see a movie is so much easier than reading a novel, right? And in 73, everyone was seeing those films. But The Exorcist is not alone in kind of making those waves. You and I, again, have often said that the 80s have been the golden age of horror movies. We've had Poltergeist, The Omen, Suspiria, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Chainsaw Massacre. Whether they're in the late 60s or late 70s or the 80s, this kind of triad of decades was paramount in shaping America's idea of what exorcism is.
Oh yeah, and that's just, again, scratching the surface with the everything tied to the satanic panic and exorcism and possession and all of that. Obviously, that list that you just read off could be, 1,000 times longer and still not capture everything.
I mean, Evil Dead, Drag Me to Hell,
Rosemary's
all of these...
Baby, we could just go on and on and on.
Absolutely. Ugh, Rosemary's Baby. What a good film. So again, all of this kind of pushed into more satanic panic in the 90s, and it's just kind of snowballed into this crazy thing, which for me brings the question of, why do we connotate exorcism and possession films in the horror world? Why are they like the supreme form of scary film? And what I mean by that is, you and I talk to a lot of people who either love scary movies but won't watch demonic movies, or they'll love a good suspense film but they won't go to any sort of exorcist or possession film. It's intriguing to me that they are so, intimidating or daunting. Why do you think that is?
I will say, speaking personally, when I see a good, slasher film or a monster movie or something like that, it's more of a thrilling experience. When I see a good exorcism movie or, demon movie, it's one that just unsettles me for a longer period of time. So I think, at the end of the day, it's kind of this idea that the aftershocks are going to, keep you up at night. In any movie that has truly scared me to the core, almost without fail, are movies that deal more with the spiritual, demonic kind of thing. They really can, I don't know, at least for me personally, they get under my skin much more. They are the kind of thing where, I know that there's not a monster, but but do I know that there's not going to be a demon in my house? It's something that I think is often easier to be deeply upset by. The only exception to that, by the way, is just kind of maybe home invasion movies, because those two also are things that when I'm sitting alone at home afterwards, I go, what was that sound outside? But yeah, I think it's just that feeling you get after watching it is going to be so much more impactful after watching a demon movie than almost any other subgenre of horror.
Yeah, I know a few people who are very skeptical about, paranormal activity. I hate saying those two words together because of the movie. They're very skeptical about anything supernatural. There we go. But when it comes to anything Ouija board or skinwalkers or demons, they steer clear of it with a 10-foot pole, and it just kind of makes me laugh. For me, kind of my opinion about it is, I think demonic and exorcism films kind of strip away the monster a little bit and expose humans to what sometimes we're really capable of.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of a metaphor, really, of it's not about the demon, it's about what humans would do if there were nothing holding them back, almost. And
that it's not just, any person. A lot of times it's, the most
innocent,
kind and innocent people. Yeah.
And so for me, I go to see demonic films and I love them. I mean, it's just something that I love. But I also am much more afraid of home invasion films, or found footage even scares me more than a lot of demonic films, because it has the sense of reality. And I really don't believe in actual demons. And so I look at it and I have that veil of logic that kind of is like, wow, that's super fun and I love this, but I don't believe in any of it. It's interesting to me that they're so scary to some people when we just have an age of logic and reasoning, and it's just fun to hear what people are scared of, I guess.
yeah, and obviously, people are going to have different reactions to different things, but yeah, especially in a community that, us living in Utah, where there is so much prevalence to the belief in heaven and hell and these kinds of concepts. I think that people are going to be more likely to finish a movie like The Exorcist and keep them up all night than them watching Silence of the Lambs and that keeping them up all night.
I think it, again, is just part of the zeitgeist that we are in. That
Yes.
people hear demons and they take their cultural background and kind of use that for their frame of reference. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just fascinating to look at the sociology behind this type of horror genre.
And of course, that's part of what we're going to dive into, is looking at how ubiquitous a lot of it is.
Yeah, hells yeah. See what I did there?
Yeah.
So let's dive in. Let's talk about exorcism across the world.
Well, should we just start with the one that everyone is probably the most familiar with then? Give
absolutely.
us a taste of the Catholic Roman ritual.
Oh, and this is my lover. I love the Catholics and how they do their possession, because it is so, to me, ritualistic and over the top. It harkens back to paganism in some context. I don't mean any of this offensively. It's just really fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
The Catholic rite of exorcism, also known as the Roman rite, is very, very robust and is probably the most robust of all Christian sects out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the most ubiquitous. A lot of times when we watch a possession film, they are performing in some capacity a variation or the actual Roman rite. By which I have a copy. A certain best friend got it for me one year, and it's one of my top 10 favorite gifts I've ever received.
You're welcome.
The Roman rite is kind of segregated into two different versions. You have minor exorcisms, which are typically done first, and they're mostly sprinkling the holy water, saying a lot of prayers, reading from the Bible, holding a rosary. Very kind of simplistic in their approach, similar to what you'll see in any other Christian sect. You do have, though, kind of the major exorcism, which is what we are all really familiar with when it comes to possession films. You'll get the exorcist that comes out, and they've got their briefcase filled with all the different things that they need to exorcise the demon and all of that.
And yeah, there's certain prayers that are very lengthy. There is repetition of a lot of stuff. There is sprinkling of holy water. There's
Absolutely. And the Roman rite is something that has definitely died off when it comes to Catholicism. And I think, again, you're going to find that in all of the cultures we're talking about now in 2023. Back in the day, it was something that was very popular for people who had mental health issues or any sort of deformation, any sort of handicap.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of gotten a bad rap, and it definitely deserves the bad rap it has gotten because it has been very problematic in the past. The great horror film, The Taking of Emily Rose, that's not the name. The
Possession of Emily Rose.
The Possession, thank you, is an actual story.
No, The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Exorcism, thank you. Well, that trigger word we're talking about. It is a great kind of historical portrayal of a poor girl who actually was killed in the process of exorcism. Her parents didn't really believe that medicine was the case, and so they just went with the exorcism, and it ultimately killed her. She didn't eat. She was deprived of water. It got really gnarly, really nasty.
Yeah, and the real case is Annalise Mitchell.
Thank you, yep. This has led nowadays that the church is extremely hesitant to perform any sort of an exorcism. It is a lengthy process to get it approved by any sort of diocese. There has to be abundant evidence that supernatural stuff is happening. You can't just say that you are possessed and expect your local clergyman to come over and perform these rites. To the extent that a lot of people who are ordained in the Catholic Church don't even do exorcisms because it's just not really heard of anymore. That's my understanding. If you are a Catholic and you know of an exorcist, I would love to talk to them and pick their brain. So please let us know.
I will say a couple of little caveats that I've kind of learned relatively recently with some of the, casual reading that I also like to do. So, one, I know that there has actually been a large upswing in the number of exorcists. So it has become more prevalent recently in terms of, more people are going through the training to become exorcists and stuff like that. I know that they were almost unheard of, especially like in the 80s and 90s. And the handful of people who were exorcists apparently were just so busy. So also, it seems to depend kind of on the area you live in when it comes to Catholicism, whether it is kind of unheard of or if it's actually relatively commonplace. Because especially in America and stuff, you're probably not going to see very many exorcism rituals being done by the Catholic Church. In Italy, however, there are hundreds or thousands of them done in a given year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. That's true. Father Amorth is a Catholic priest who has definitely, I think, kind of led this renaissance of exorcism. He is the Vatican City's chief exorcist. And
I think he's dead now, but yeah.
He is, yes. And it's one of those things, like you say, I think it is tied to the culture that you're in. I mean, the Vatican City is in Italy, so of course they're probably going to be much more lenient when it comes to this. But also it kind of goes back to that minor versus major exorcism. Are they performing a full ceremony and reading the prayer of St. Michael and, throwing holy water and hearing, the demoniac speak in tongues and levitate off the ground? Or are they coming to, Mima's house because she thinks her grandkid is possessed because they're being very unruly that day? It's all relative to the situation in this scenario.
Yeah, for sure. I read a book actually by Amorth I don't know, a month or two ago, where he was kind of talking about, in his mind, his perceived need for exorcism and things like that. And he talked about probably leaning more on the side of greater exorcisms being something that he basically has, and this was written, I think, in the 90s. He basically stopped having to get permission. He just would show up and exorcise people all day long, like 30 people a day. I think his claim at one point was like over 1,000 performed a year for the last 15 years or something.
Yeah, I think Father Amorth is a little bit of a problematic individual.
Yeah, we watched that movie, the Devil and Father Amorth, which is a documentary, and they definitely use some really cheap camera tricks to make people look possessed.
Yeah, it's one of those things where he became so kind of well known for exorcism that I felt a little like, it became his profession. Mm-hmm. So what's reality and what is you needing to pay your water bill? I'm not trying to degrade any sort of Catholic exorcism that has happened. It started to feel a little fabricated, especially his books. One critique I do have of the Catholic exorcism rite is they tend to go the route of this is the only exorcism that's going to work. It's the only true path. We think about the Warrens a lot of times where you have to do this elaborate exorcism for the demon to be expelled. And I just don't believe in that. I don't think it is healthy all the time. If it helps the person and their idea of what is going on, that's great. But there are so many other ways that people can be exorcised. And you're going to talk about one that I really appreciated, which is My Best Friend's Exorcism. Which essentially is the power of friendship and love is all the person needed to be rid of the demon. I think that's important. Overall, I think we are all pretty well familiar who walk in the horror world of the Catholic rite, so I'm going to kind of keep it at that. The only thing I wanted to mention, I want to end by reading the prayer of Saint Michael to cleanse us as we move forward on our exorcism journey.
Keep Pazuzu out of this episode.
Yeah. So Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the malice and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do you, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the divine power, thrust into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. All right, let's move on to something adjacent.
Yes. So let's talk about some other Christian exorcisms. The first one I'm actually going to talk about just briefly is Greek Orthodox. That is a Christian sect that often gets left out. We usually just jump straight to the Protestants, but Greek Orthodox kind of splintered well before Protestants ever thought of breaking out from the Catholic Church. And so I found it really interesting. It has a lot of similarities to the Catholic exorcism ritual, but it has less prescription. Essentially, it just kind of boils down to a priest draws out the evil spirit using scriptures and prayer. They get to choose the scripture and prayer, though two of the most commonly used ones are some prayers that were written by some early Orthodox saints that were apparently notable exorcists during their time in life. And so, yeah, it's basically ritual, prayer, and scripture until the demon is cast out. And, it may involve, obviously, use of the cross and holy water and things like that as well. But, yeah, it's less structured than the Catholic one.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Switching into the Protestant world, it really kind of it's hard to nail anything down because as with almost everything else in the Protestant world, things really kind of depend on the specific church. It can often depend on like local leadership as well as kind of like larger groups. For example, the Baptists tend to have like large conferences of like major Baptist organizations that then make decisions that then kind of get dispersed down, but there might be rifts even among that faith, or things might be changed by the local priests or ministers or things like that for these different faiths. So what I was able to find, so I just found some specific examples. So Lutherans, for example, actually use a like shortened version of the Roman ritual. Martin Luther himself actually abbreviated the Roman ritual, and then later Lutheran leadership kind of cut it down even more. But fundamentally, it is the Roman rite, just the abridged version. Methodists usually often just have more of a simple prayer to cast out evil, and then we'll offer something like communion or some other sacrament of the Christian faith. One of the most notable and kind of most iconic Protestant groups is the Pentecostals, who often will have deliverance ministries where there'll be a deliverance ceremony, which is often a more public diagnosis of people being influenced by the devil or being possessed. That can often even be like, oh, you are possessed because you played with a Ouija board, or because you cheated on your spouse or whatever. Then the demon is then named. Usually the preacher will call or demand that the demon name themselves, and then they do. And then
sorry, that's also very prominent in the Catholic rite as well.
Yes.
If you know the name of the demon, you have the power over the demon. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and that does seem to be common in all of them. It's just interesting, with this, it's kind of more performative isn't the right word, but it's there's a sort of a certain kind of structure that seems to be for the benefit of the possessed as well as everyone else who is attending. But then usually the casting out is relatively simple. It usually involves anointing the person with oil or holy water and laying on hands on the person. But what this usually involves is usually less tame a lot of Christian faiths, if someone's anointed with oil, it's just gently putting some oil on their head, rubbing it in or something. This can be as extreme as smearing an anointed oil or holy water on the preacher's hand, who then kind of smacks the person on the head. Obviously, that's kind of a more extreme example, but that isn't unheard of. But yeah, it's usually they yell something like I cast you out in the name of Jesus. Often the blood of Jesus is specifically referenced, or it can even just be be gone, Satan, and beat them on the head. Again, all of these things are going to vary church to church. Protestantism is a spectrum of different faiths that are at the end of the day reliant on a belief in Jesus and in the Bible, but a lot of the specifics beyond that are going to just vary depending on the specific faith. But yeah, the example that I give for this is Grady Hendrix's wonderful novel My Best Friend's Exorcism, because we do see an exorcism ritual being performed by someone, largely goes to high schools to inspire them to believe in Jesus through weightlifting.
I forgot about that. That's
so
fun.
Yeah, it's so good. And he's the one who tries to perform this exorcism, and then, of course, in the novel, that doesn't work out so well, and we have to rely on powers of love and friendship instead to make things happen. So, but I like it as an example of it because we do kind of see some of the more charismatic Protestant methods of exorcism on display in that book, and I just love that book a lot. So definitely worth your time if you are interested in seeing this example of Protestant exorcism.
Moving along, I wanted to talk very briefly about kind of South American exorcism. I think this is definitely one of the untapped forms of exorcism that I would love to see a lot more portrayed in horror fiction.
Mm-hmm.
This is separate from, of course, the Catholic Rite. Catholicism has a very tight grip in South America, and so a lot of times we'll see that kind of Catholic influence when we talk about exorcism. So what I want to talk about is a little bit different from that. A lot of people who came to South America were slaves from Africa, and they brought along with them these kind of old interpretations of paganism and mixed that with Catholicism and kind of created this really cool hybrid religion. Sometimes you'll hear it called Santeria. Other times you'll call it Macumba. Macumba was very prevalent when I was in Uruguay for 2 years. It was kind of the big alternative to Christianity, and the Christians sure thought it was evil and dark magic for sure. This type of exorcism is definitely more shamanistic and really kind of revolves around this idea of offerings or ofrendas, which essentially there is someone who's been hexed or cursed. You'll have a witch or shaman, or to use the actual Spanish term, a macumba, a macumbero, who has cursed your family, cursed an individual, and has sent some sort of entity or spirit to kind of hover over them, possess them, take over their life, or really be like a poltergeist to some extent. It's not so much, the screaming and writhing and puking up blood, rather than just always having bad luck, or always being sick. More of that kind of naturalistic form of exorcism, if that makes sense. In some capacity, it comes off more like a haunting than, a possession like we are used to. These ofrendas, though, are really important because the shaman of the sect is going to take that and offer it to the entity rather than, exorcising, the individual. They're trying to plead with the entity that, here is this gift, take this rather than this individual, and move on. Or white magic, I hate using that phrase, healing magic, good magic, herbal magic is also very ubiquitous. Here's a potion, here's an unguent, rub this on you in the morning and the night type of a thing. When it comes to the ofrendas, though, I watched a few of these when I was in Uruguay, and it really is almost a celebration. You're trying to draw the spirit into the celebratory moment, typically with some sort of Catholic priest or iconography on an altar that symbolizes the entity or the god that you're praying to.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people will offer money, they'll light the candles. Food is a huge ofrenda. We would often be walking on the streets and just see this kind of mess of an altar with, food and money scattered around. The music is even an offering. Occasionally, though, there are some animal sacrifices. I went to sleep when I was in Uruguay often to the sound of a chicken freaking out, and then you hear that last scream and the chicken is now dead. Or pigs, of course. The bigger the animal, the better the gift. An example in film of something like this is The Old Ways. It's an amazing film that is very underrated, and I think a lot of people need to watch, about kind of the old Mexican rite of exorcism and how their shamans would do it. And it's phenomenal. I really love it. And if you want to learn more about kind of this type of exorcism, definitely check it out.
Yeah, and along those lines, something that we didn't go into as much with our research, I'm kind of realizing now, but this reminds me of, in a lot of ways, is kind of more like the Central African, often kind of more tribal beliefs and sort of shamans and stuff like that, which reminds me of His House, where a lot of times it's maybe not even necessarily spirit possession, but it like maybe can be a witch doctor or shaman can specifically attach a spirit to you to haunt you, or things like that, and things may have to happen along those lines as well. So you can see a lot of kind of similar vibes conceptually.
That's a great example. His House is definitely kind of the similar vibe here of, it's not always about the demon, it's about getting some sort of revenge or cursing or hexing someone for doing something that they probably should not have.
Yes. Such a good movie.
Everyone should watch both of them. They are great. And both on Netflix.
There we go. Yeah, I've been meaning to watch The Old Ways for a while, but have not yet. So I have that treat to look forward to. Should we switch gears to my faith?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, and then also maybe bring up some of the Asian exorcism.
Yes. So the final kind of major Christian religion that we haven't kind of talked about at all is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly referred to as Mormons, which, I am a member of that faith. Yeah, I guess interestingly enough, I would have the power to perform an exorcism, though we don't usually use that term. Okay, so fundamentally the idea is, like other Christian faiths, we believe that there is the demonic that exists. We believe that those are followers of Satan who, this is pulling from the Bible. There, it talks about a third of the hosts of heaven were cast out. This is, where demons come from. And so, we believe that often, demons can try to influence our lives, and that there are instances where people or a location may have an evil spirit inhabiting it. So, really what this boils down to is someone who is a holder of what we call the Melchizedek priesthood, which is kind of the higher priesthood power that men can receive, and younger men usually have the lower one, which is called the Aaronic priesthood. But a Melchizedek priesthood holder, any Melchizedek priesthood holder, would be able to basically very simply state their authority as a holder of the Melchizedek priesthood, and in the name of Jesus, cast out the devil. It doesn't have to be really anything more than that. Obviously, things like prayer and fasting and preparation might be useful. A lot of times, if something like this happens, church leaders may be involved, but it is relatively simple and streamlined as far as the rituals go. That And again, a lot of times it's not referred to as exorcism. It's casting out a devil in terms of the terminology that's used. But so that's my faith.
When I was in Uruguay, I was serving a mission for this church, and we actually did one or two of them after those kind of ceremonies that would happen in the streets because people were just so freaked out by it.
Mm-hmm.
And at its heart, it's just a prayer with a set of commands to the demon or entity. You're essentially saying, "Get out of here,"
Yeah, it's that simple. So I find that kind of interesting, just to see how often the ritual of a lot of Christian faiths is so much more complex. Well, with this, it's extremely simple. So, should we get into some of our Asian?
Bits? I think let's kind of
jump to another part of the world.
Yeah, shift away from a lot of the kind of Judeo-Christian ideas.
Great. All right. Let me tell you about the Japanese Shinto religion a little bit. So Shinto, of course, is a very major religious force in Japan, though it doesn't take a lot of structure. It's basically a folk religion. It is polytheistic and animistic. Basically, many Japanese identify as being Shinto, or at least like the government will say like, oh, most people are Shinto, at least in terms of people who are practicing celebrations and stuff like that are specifically tied to the Shinto religions. But the key idea here is that there are these supernatural entities that are kind of spirits, kind of gods. They don't really quite fit into either category super neatly, that are called kami. And kami are believed to inhabit all things. They're present in nature, in buildings, all sorts of stuff. And a lot of times they are worshipped in family shrines, household shrines, as well as public shrines, which the public shrines are usually run by Shinto priests. Now, Shinto priests can either be someone who decides to specifically become this. A lot of times they make their living elsewhere and then do this part-time. Often there's offerings made by people who go and visit a shrine or a temple. For the most part, it's either like a hereditary thing. You did it because your dad did it, or there are a couple of colleges in Japan that will basically certify you as a Shinto priest. Really, kind of the idea here is that kami kind of exists across the spectrum of good, evil, and everything in between. And so kami can either be evil or maybe tricksters or pranksters or whatever. But, those kinds of kami often are not what you would want to have around. Sometimes they can cause illness, they can cause sudden death. But any of these kind of more malevolent kami are the ones that the Shinto priests would be wanting to get rid of.
Real quick, Nathaniel, I'm just curious, in your research, I know the Japanese word for darkness is yami?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, is there anything you read, the two words sound very similar.
I'm not sure if there's a connection or not.
Gotcha. Okay, I was just curious.
But yeah, so essentially, when it comes to any sort of like purification ritual, the Shinto priests are going to be the ones who are going to do this. Basically, a purification ritual is referred to as a harai, and harai are, kind of a big range of potential things. So sometimes what this means is, hey, let's get rid of any bad forces in nature, so we can have a good year and a good harvest and all of that kind of stuff. And so they might perform some sort of ritual, usually involving water and salt, washing hands and face, washing shrines, offering goods and food to either appease the kami or to bring in good kami. But sometimes there are going to be these kinds of harai rituals that are performed because someone is sick with a strange illness that maybe doctors haven't been able to pinpoint, or maybe they feel an evil influence in their lives, a rash of bad luck, things like that. So people will come to often specific shrines that are kind of more known for these kinds of rituals. And then, the priest or an assistant priest will often, perform certain chants. They will purify offerings made by the people who come using like this wand. They will, obviously burn certain incenses. And a lot of times it's like a washing ritual. They'll clean the person. Sometimes the person is even instructed to like stand under a waterfall while chanting a certain ritual or liturgy. Often there can be cleansing rituals that will like cleanse a whole big group of people. These are actually really common. They're called oharai. And especially if there's been like a big natural disaster or something, this is a very common thing for a lot of these Shinto shrines to do. But yeah, a lot of these kinds of rituals will involve, interestingly enough, shooting arrows that are like certain like ritual arrows that they'll just kind of like shoot them out into the woods, and that apparently scares away evil kami. Sometimes shrines will sell people the special arrows to keep in their homes as a deterrent, things like that. But it's really kind of interesting because really it just kind of boils down to this idea of purification. Because Shinto religion doesn't necessarily have clearly defined morality, good, evil, things like that. It's kind of more about reflection, being your best self, things like that. And so this can be sort of how the Shinto religion handles a lot of this. Now, one of the best examples I have seen of this is a book called The Girl in the Well by Rin Chupeco. It's Chupeco. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but
I was just gonna say too, you and I are both two Americanized white men. If we have any of this information wrong, please correct us. We would love to learn.
Yes, yeah. All of this is based on a few weeks of research and is the best of our understanding, but obviously, especially if you have any personal experience with this, we would love to hear from you. But yeah, so The Girl in the Well is really a fun one. It's kind of getting into the idea of certain like monstrous spirits. It's a girl who is murdered in a well, who by her lover, very much along the lines of the same kind of folklore that was the influence for things like The Ring. But basically, it's her following this young man who is being influenced by some evil kami, and eventually does culminate in a sort of exorcism, kind of more intense harai ritual performed at a shrine. So it's a good book, definitely really a fun twist on some existing tropes and stuff, and it's worth your time.
Awesome. Some really good information, and I think it's super fascinating, all of the different things out there. Exorcism is not contained to Christianity at all.
Do you want to share a little bit about maybe like sort of Wiccan and pagan?
Oh, yeah, this is my jam. Get ready. Max is going to ooze with excitement here. Paganism nowadays is, of course, much different than what it was way back when, before Christianity decided to take over. So I want to kind of focus in on modern day paganism / Wicca. And what I really like and find fascinating about Wicca, whether that's Thelema or kind of modern Wiccan covens, is a lot of their doctrine is undefined. They really kind of allow individuals to believe and practice however they want to. There are certain books and kind of grimoires that outline, good practices. There are tools that you can use that are pretty known throughout any of the different beliefs. You have your athame, which is a dagger, a cauldron, a wand, all of these kind of prevalent items, but the actual process is very unique and very individualistic, which I think is how people should do it. That is my personal opinion. That spirituality is very individual and looks different depending on your life experience. But again, that is another soapbox that I don't need to step on today. So, exorcism looks a little bit different here. It isn't really casting out of an evil spirit. While Wicca and paganism, of course, believe in that, there's not a huge, at least what I could find, idea of evil spirit. Perhaps it's a ghost. Perhaps it is an entity. They very well could believe in demons, but they also could very well believe in just a negative space. It really kind of depends on who you're talking to, which again, I think is awesome. A lot of it comes down to spells. You can kind of craft your own spell using, different items that they recommend, or you can, go out and buy a grimoire and figure out what ritual or what spell calls to you that someone else has done and have written in their book of shadows or personal grimoire, and apply that to yourself. Me, for instance, I am a skeptic. I don't believe in a lot of the supernatural stuff out there, but I do believe quite thoroughly in the idea of ritual, where when you're doing something physical to represent a mental state, that helps your brain kind of resolve the conflict. So if I watch a really very scary horror movie, or if I'm going through a lot of anxiety and depression for something going on in my life, instead of just saying, oh, I'm okay, or instead of praying, I will do a Wiccan ritual to kind of help my brain settle and calm down. And a lot of this modern day neo-paganism, Wicca, involves a lot of this. Caveat here is, again, depending on the sect that you go to, a lot of this is going to be different. If you are a neo-Greek mythologist, you're going to be praying to those different deities. If you are, a believer in the Viking deities, you're going to have different rituals that pertain to those gods that belong to that pantheon. So a few of the things I wanted to bring up are some of the things I'm familiar with as kind of a neo-pagan / academic / pantheist. I don't believe in any sort of a deity. I believe that God is in love, essentially. I don't know if we've ever talked about my current beliefs, Nathaniel. This might be a fun topic for another podcast. So a few of the things I wanted to bring up are crystals are very important in these kinds of rites, and 5 of them come to mind. You have black tourmaline, obsidian, amethyst, pyrite, and clear quartz. You're going to see a lot of these when it comes to ejecting or kind of removing a sort of entity or negative spirit. Sage is huge in these circles. When I first moved into my house back in May, I saged the place. Again, not necessarily because I believe in it, but because there is the sense of starting fresh, removing anything that was here before, and starting over to some extent. They do have prayers, but oftentimes the prayer is to the person or to the energy, to the entity. They're very passive in nature. Sigil work is something I really love. You're essentially creating a symbol out of a mantra or a saying and hanging that up around the house or burning it as a sign of kind of accepting it inside you. Bells and chimes are very prevalent. Sound bowls, I think we're all familiar with those. Salt and salt water. You can kind of spray that on your door in your house to eject those spirits. Sun and moon baths are very common as well. Go out and just lay in the sun and let that vitamin D do the exercising for you, or the moonlight. Reiki is really popular nowadays. That one I'm a little more skeptical about. Massage, I am not skeptical about. I love a good massage. Something I've been really interested in lately is a ritual known as cord severance or cord cutting. And the idea here is there's kind of a metaphysical cord attached to negative energy or to a person, to some sort of thing in your life that is binding you, and the shaman or the witch, the warlock, the wizard, whatever you want to call it, essentially cuts that cord and frees you of that burden. And I'm sure Nathaniel is thinking of exactly who I'm thinking about when I'm thinking of this.
Yep.
The aroma meditation is really good. As a healthcare professional, I do not think that essential oils can cure anything, but I do believe that they are very good at kind of calming and refocusing. I use a lot in my house, not because I think they're going to cure me of, my back pain or my hip pain, but because they just help me relax. Our olfactory nerves are very close to our memory center, so a lot of times good smells make us remember good memories, and vice versa. So a few good different smells that you can use would be lavender is really nice. That helps you sleep as well. Peppermint, orange oils, tea tree, bergamot, sage again, eucalyptus, lemon, ylang ylang, or lang lang. The pronunciation there is a mystery to everybody. And then chamomile. All of those oils are supposedly very good for ejecting negative space and bringing in a sense of peace and calmness. A few kind of more darker methods of ejecting kind of negative energy and spirits would be voodoo. Voodoo inherently is not evil or wicked at all, which the media likes to portray otherwise, and that's very racist. But voodoo dolls essentially inflicting harm on someone else to get what you want, that's not okay.
Yeah, there are some things in the voodoo religion that can be dark rituals that I have to vehemently be against, but like killing people and using their bodies for things, don't do that. But
yeah,
but there are also a lot of things in the faith that are more positive and good.
And again, you can say that about any religion, I think.
Of course.
There are good people, there are bad people, and you can get what you get.
Absolutely.
The last thing I want to talk about, which creeps me out a little bit, I have a really awesome store that I like to visit, and they have a whole section for spirit dolls, where you can essentially take a vessel, such as a doll, and kind of exorcise the negative energy or the spirit into the doll and contain it there, which essentially is basically the Annabelle story. And I think it's just the dolls, they creep me out dramatically. The idea of a doll being used as some sort of vessel for, negativity is just gross, and I don't like it. So, that is kind of Wicca / paganism in a nutshell. It is much deeper than what I just described. This is the very basics. If you'd like to learn more, come over to my house, and I'll give you 10 to 20 books about what you can do.
Yes, this is the intense Spark Notes version of all of these things.
For sure. This is just something I'm deeply passionate about, and I can talk ad nauseum about, so we better move on.
Yeah. Do you want to hear about Korean folk religions?
Absolutely, because this stuff is so cool.
Yes. So this actually might have been the thing that sent us on this journey almost more than anything else was when we watched the movie The Wailing together, and there was this exorcism ritual being performed by a shaman that involved song and dance and costume and all of that, and we're just like, what? And
this movie, though, The Wailing, if you have not seen it, stop what you are doing. Go watch it, because it is a work of art. It's a slow burn, but the ending will stick with you for years.
Yes, it is a really, really amazing Korean horror film. But yeah, so essentially, Korean folk religions don't necessarily have a clear name even. It's much like Shinto, often is kind of this lack of organization to it. It doesn't necessarily have a clear way to be a follower of this faith. But there are priests throughout, especially, more rural areas of Korea that are often referred to as Mu, I believe it is how it's pronounced. It's Mu. And they will perform rituals. And really, any ritual they perform is called a gut, G-U-T. Again, I'm probably butchering all of the pronunciation of everything, but I'm doing my best. But the rituals are all kind of, fundamentally going to this idea that there are spirits and gods throughout the world, kind of like the kami with Shinto. The soul is considered the life or the source of life, breath. Any physical illness is linked with sickness of the soul. So, if your mind is ill, it can hurt your soul and vice versa. And so, especially if you are showing signs of mental illness, that could be potentially caused by possession by malevolent spirits. So, let me tell you a little bit about these priests or shamans. Essentially, they either become one by one of two ways. They are either kind of like it's father to son, passed down hereditarily. A lot of times the hereditary ones will have certain like tools that are passed down, instruments, symbolic things that they can use that are associated with the powers of some sort of nature god or gods that can then give this shaman power over evil. And so if they bring a certain item with them, they can use it to help influence and in the case of exorcism, cast out an evil spirit from someone that is affecting their soul, that is damaging their soul. The other ones, the other kind of major group of shamans are referred to as initiated priests, and fundamentally what this kind of comes down to is this idea that like someone was called by a god, and being called by a god means that you are actually possessed by a god, that you too are exhibiting some signs of a possession, but it's from this powerful positive force. However, god possession does have often some interesting negative side effects to it, including a lot of physical pain and psychosis. But essentially, being a vessel for a god enables you to then cast out the evil. So the rituals tend to involve prayers, song, dance, incense, costume. Beyond kind of having those kinds of elements, they're going to be very different from shaman to shaman, because generally they're trained by their father or whoever's in the area, and so there's really not a like structure that tends to be followed. But yeah, it essentially boils down to you do things that get the evil spirit's attention, and then use the powers of the god to get it out. But yeah, so shamans used to be like very ubiquitous throughout a lot of Korea. They were called on for regular rituals, harvest rituals, things like that. But in more recent times, this tends to be a very rural thing, and it tends to be more focused on spiritual life. So yeah, you don't see tons of Korean shamans around, especially in like bigger cities anymore, but it still is a very prevalent faith group throughout Korea, and yeah, especially is very common in those rural areas. And yeah, the wailing is like a perfect example of this.
I really like the idea of kind of the god component to all of that.
Yeah.
We usually degrade the demonic, and I don't know, it kind of reminds me of Saint Maud, where why can't we be possessed by the divine, and why is that not as evil?
Mm-hmm.
I just really like it.
Yeah, I found that especially interesting, and like, yeah, for the most part, like there was a lot of things that I found similar to Shinto, but then that idea especially really stood out to me, and is why I wanted to highlight this particular group.
Should we take it back to the state of Utah?
Sure.
So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier on about why possession is so much scarier to other people than some of the other horror categories. And Nathaniel, you have a lot of experience with this kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And that would be kind of the Native American idea of skinwalkers. I have two very good friends who I've said skinwalkers 3 times in the last month, so they're going to be really scared to listen to this episode. Sorry, guys. But this idea of skinwalking is essentially, a much more malevolent version of lycanthropy or vampirism. It is a human adorning some sort of curse or change that turns them into a monster, makes them evil, vile. Here in Utah, we have Skinwalker Ranch, which is very well known in horror circles to be a huge area for, UFO activity, but also, terrifying stories of seeing skinwalkers. We've talked a lot about these creatures, and, we could even call them cryptids, per se. They are shamans in a Native American community who have been either cursed and or elected to become kind of this wicked, evil version of themselves. And people are really scared of them. I mean, Nathaniel, give us just a quick kind of Spark Notes version of your big story that you have.
Well, so, I mean, Skinwalker Ranch, I go into this a lot more in episode 3 of the podcast, but essentially my uncle was their LDS bishop and saw a lot of the UFO activity, including had a run-in with a strange, extra large, extra scary wolf that seemed unkillable, firsthand. And so he shared that with me. I also have a friend who is Native American who had a run-in when he was younger, where he believes that he and his, I think it was his grandmother, were chased down the road by a skinwalker, and it was terrifying, and it's something he does not want to ever talk about, which understandable. So there's a lot of these beliefs. In Utah, we often tie them to the Ute Indians because, that's the Native American tribe that we have here. But, skinwalkers originally come more from Navajo belief, but it kind of boils down to this thing where, I guess, the Utes and Navajos were at war with each other at one time. The Utes got access to horses sooner than the Navajos did and used that to do a lot of dominating and, enslaving a number of Navajo and the like, and then the Navajo cursed Utes with skinwalkers, and that's been a problem for them ever since.
Yeah, and again, I think it goes back. I mean, we could talk about lycanthropy or vampirism and Vlad the Impaler and the full moon psychosis in Europe. Again, it's kind of this reformation of common ideas where we don't understand something, and so we villainize it and turn it into what it's not. And whether you believe in skinwalkers or not, the concept and the idea is very scary. A human turning into a were animal of some sort, chasing you, being immortal, impervious to damage. No one wants to be in that situation. No one wants to see that. And, I look at it as an academic and I think, well, what is the difference between skinwalkers and, werewolves? They're kind of in the same category for me, but I don't know anybody who has seen a skinwalker. I don't know anybody who has seen a werewolf. I don't have any sort of experience with either or. I am just looking at it from a logical standpoint and can't judge anyone who is deeply terrified of these things, regardless of if they're true or not. And I just really think it's fascinating that here in Utah, we have this little part of our state that is so scary to people. And the lore and the myth is much bigger than one episode of our podcast.
Well, and to even branch it out further, there's also a lot of other Native American beliefs that have similar vibes too, right? The Wendigo belief or things like that, where a lot of different tribes all over the Americas have their own kind of versions of, either shapeshifters or evil coming on someone or whatever, that will have specific beliefs and rituals and things like that are tied to it. Obviously, it's as complex as any of the other groups that we're talking about. Native American tribal beliefs could be a whole giant spectrum that we could spend years trying to explore and barely scratch the surface of.
Yeah, so moving on, I just wanted to talk about kind of a few things to do if you feel like you're being attacked or targeted by a skinwalker. And then I also wanted to talk about shamanism a little bit and kind of Native American traditions when it comes to what they would do for you, again, from my white man perspective, if you were being targeted by a skinwalker.
Yes.
So, for skinwalkers, you again, this is all from the World Wide Web, so take it with a grain of holy salt. Learn about skinwalkers and their abilities. This allows you as an individual to identify and respond to any signs that you may think come from them. Be aware of your surroundings. If you notice an increase in animal carcasses around your property, this could be a skinwalker attack. From what I read, this is like the infestation phase of a Catholic possession, where they're making their presence known, which I thought was very unsettling. No one wants to find a dead animal outside your house. Keep a safe distance from the skinwalker. Do not approach it. Do not respond to it. A lot of the research I did said if you ignore a skinwalker, that's essentially the best method to prevent any further attacks. Moving along, you can use protective wards. These, of course, are going to be dependent on your belief system or the shaman that you go to. And then the last thing is seek professional help. A popular method for cleansing is you need white sage, an eagle feather, and some cedar bark, and a bowl of fresh water and a bowl of salt. You can light a fire with the cedar bark, let it burn until it's reduced to ashes, and then place the ashes in a bowl of fresh water. Stir the water with the eagle feather until the ashes are dissolved, and then you take the bowl of salt and sprinkle it around the perimeter of your home, saying a prayer to the gods, asking them to protect you from the skinwalker, which I think is a very beautiful ritual. I love the kind of the methodology there.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, again, kind of the skinwalker box. I've said it so much, I'm going to start seeing things in the middle of the night. Shaman as a whole, like we've discussed, is, kind of this passive priest. They are definitely more nature-focused, or less about the Bible, less about saying prayers, more about doing other things, more tied to nature, tied to Mother Earth. So a few things that a shaman would do, especially a Native American shaman, would be things like self-hypnosis, chanting, drumming, dancing, fasting, depriving you of sleep, isolation and solitude, contemplation. They definitely use tobacco, sage, peyote, ayahuasca, other kinds of mind-altering drugs, sweat lodges, rattles, food, and then potions and unguents like you would see in what we've talked about already. So again, very high level, very SparkNotes version about Native American kind of ceremony and the spooky skinwalkers of Utah.
Well, let's jump across the world again to the Hindu religion. So I was really curious, knowing that it is a very polytheistic religion and things like that, to kind of see how Hinduism responds to this idea of spirit possession. And apparently it is something that they tackle. And I actually found a really cool video that I highly recommend if you're interested in, from what I'd say to check out, just from National Geographic on YouTube, where they actually documented and followed basically the whole ritual of a Hindu priest. But essentially the idea here is that there are some specific gods that are going to be associated with purging of evil spirits. There is a belief in spirits, and that some of them are evil influences on the world. Either working for evil gods, or at the very least, just maybe malicious or trickstery or things like that. And usually, how that's going to be manifesting is a lot of illnesses that are kind of unexplainable. So it could be strange lumps, regular muscle constrictions that are painful, headaches, stomach aches, your eyes being bloodshot or turning red, extensive bouts of depression, things like that. Usually, the possessed, like a very high majority, apparently, of the possessed tend to be women who claim that they were attacked by some sort of evil entity in the evening, especially if they're like walking down the street at night. This is very common, especially in more rural areas in India, where they will be walking down the street at night, and apparently an evil spirit will descend on them, and suddenly they'll start having all of these issues the next day. But yeah, so the temples of some specific, there are many Hindu temples. They tend to be tied to specific gods, and some specific temples are going to of these gods associated with the purging of evil spirits are going to have a special kind of back room, which is referred to as the Cave of Spirits, which is used in this ritual.
I love that.
Me too. But essentially, what this ends up happening is that the family of the possessed will bring the person there to this temple to be purified. The exorcists will go and prepare themselves. A lot of times that involves, a bathing ritual, especially, bathing in a river or body of water or whatever that's specifically associated with being sacred, like the Ganges. And then they then sit down with the possessed person, and there will be things like song and dance in order to sort of put the person under a trance. And a lot of times it's an exorcist and a bunch of like helpers that they have, and so they'll all be like chanting and singing together, and it gets the person in a trance, and that allows the spirit to kind of take control. Now, when the spirit takes control, the person then begins to kind of like lose control of their body. They start sort of thrashing around, but a lot of times it is still kind of somewhat controlled by the exorcist. It'll be like thrashing around wildly, but still in rhythm with the chanting and music. Once that is the case, they will talk to the spirit and instruct them to leave, and basically wait until, and they keep talking to him until the spirit will talk back and say, "Yes, I'll leave this body." Then the person who is possessed is led by dancers. Like, there will be people who will either be dancing kind of all the way down the pathway, or they'll be following the dancers all the way to the Cave of Spirits. So the chamber of the Cave of Spirits is opened. It's usually like sealed shut with like a big heavy lock. But they'll open it up, and the possessed person and the exorcist and their helpers will all go inside, just inside the doorway. And once inside, the spirit will then leave and enter this cave, and a coconut is smashed to end the ritual. And then the idea here is that the Cave of Spirits is a prison for these evil spirits, and they're trapped there forever. So
I have to ask, what happens if you open the cave?
I mean, they open it to get in, but they leave it like very heavily locked shut. So I think, the idea is if you leave it open, like maybe they could escape, but it didn't go into it in much detail with what I looked at. But I mean, I think that idea right there is rife for some interesting storytelling. And then
I am enthralled, Nathaniel.
I'll send you the video. It was super fascinating.
This is amazing.
Yeah, and it was Nat Geo that did it. So I was like, yes, I am all about this. And then usually after that, the exorcist will check on the person a few days later, and in many cases the person then is feeling a lot better, and they're a strong believer in the world of spirits. They acknowledged in the video that a lot of people look at this ritual and as being very superstitious and ridiculous, but when people have, especially these medical issues that like they can't explain and doctors can't really do anything with, they often then embrace this wholeheartedly, and many people have claimed to see great changes in their health. So it's really, really fascinating. I'll drop a link to that video in particular in our show notes.
Yeah, that was really cool. I liked that.
Yes, as soon as I saw a National Geographic video about it, I was like, yes, I am watching this right now, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, take us out with kind of the last thing we were looking into.
Yes, the last major world religion that we looked at was the Muslim faith. So in Islam, basically, there is a belief similar to a lot of, kind of Judeo-Christian beliefs relative to evil beings, but there's also a belief in jinn. Essentially,
jinn are terrifying. Can we just say, I'm learning a lot more about jinn, and they spooky.
Yes. So usually when we're talking about like evil spirits that could possess someone, we have jinn. Specifically evil jinn would be involved in this, and the idea with jinn is that they are unseeable entities. They come from they were created by God, and are derived from like smokeless flame, but they have agency and they are mortal. And so they can choose to be good. Some of them apparently are devout Muslims, but they can also, be evil and try to influence human lives negatively. But there are also other spirits, such as Marid, which are demons, Boot, which are evil spirits, and Shaitan, which are satanic beings. And apparently each of those categories are kind of different in terms of like the ways that they manifest through their evil influences on people. But essentially, any of those could be something that possesses a human. So generally speaking, so we have exorcism, which is referred to as al-azim or rakia. I'm butchering all of these pronunciations probably, but I'm doing my best. And the exorcists are referred to as Raki, R-A-Q-I. But yeah, so the idea here is that these evil spirits can be drawn out mostly through three kind of main things. So calling them to remember God and recite the Quran. There can be certain ritualistic things done, like blowing into the possessed person's mouth, cursing and commanding the jinn to leave, and seeking refuge with Allah by calling upon Allah, remembering Him, and addressing His creatures. So essentially, usually what happens is the priest who is doing this is going to be taking these evil influences out of a sort of like metaphorical heart of the person, and casting them out. And a lot of times that means, going into the person's home and removing, any sort of distractions that are, either like worldly things, jewelry, wealthy things, musical instruments, interestingly enough, can be a thing that can, I guess, cause some of these problems. So those things are removed. The person is then interviewed by the priest, who then tries to determine, exactly what sort of being this is, and then, asks the person about like dreams that they may have had, things like that, to kind of help determine. And then there are some specific exorcism verses from the Quran as well that can help draw out different specific types of spirits. Also, treatments can involve things like using honey and water as like a purification ritual to help clean the body and the soul, and help them be cleansed of sin. But yeah, so it has a lot of sort of similar DNA to a lot of the other faiths that we've talked about, but the idea of jinn being one of the categories is definitely uniquely Muslim, But yeah, I find it really fascinating, and a really wonderful example of this is the film Under the Shadow, which is an Iranian film that is just wonderful. It's about a jinn causing all sorts of problems for this family in Iran back, before the kind of modern Iranian regime took power, and back when it was kind of a much more conventionally Western modern country in a lot of ways. It's a wonderful film that I highly recommend. That is Muslim Exorcism.
That if you really want to see some spooky jinn stuff, there are some awesome YouTube videos out there. I pass my workday by watching scary ghost films on YouTube, and some of the spookiest ones are all about the jinn.
Okay, well, we just spent 90 minutes talking about exorcisms.
I am not complaining.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good evening to me. But we should probably wrap things up so our listeners don't lose interest. I guess without further ado, what is your big takeaway from having learned about exorcisms all over the world?
I think at the end of the day, it's just all about that concept. Doesn't matter what you believe, your beliefs are probably replicated somewhere else in a different way, and they're very similar, just with a slight twist. And I think there's beauty to that. Like, we are all humans, and we all have this desire to understand our world, and it just makes me happy.
Yeah, I agree. I love seeing all of the similarities. I love finding the unique things in each version of these ideas. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's kind of ultimately this way that humans are trying to overcome either evil, or at the very least overcome maladies or problems in their lives in a way that uses ritual and intent in a way that I think is ultimately beautiful and fascinating.
Before we wrap up, Nathaniel, how are you staying spooky with this 100th episode?
Well, I have been staying spooky lately, mostly by reading. I just read Holly by Stephen King, the new Stephen King novel, which is the 6th book featuring the character of Holly Gibney. It was pretty spooky. Involves some really upsetting serial killers that do some interesting things and have some unusual twists to kind of who they are and what they do. So definitely, if you're a Stephen King fan, or if you just enjoy kind of fun sort of detective mystery serial killer kind of stories, this one's definitely one that I give a big thumbs up to. I'm also reading a book called What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman, which I'm not far enough into to say anything yet other than that it's really good, and Clay is a wonderful writer. And of course, I'm about to play the Separate Ways DLC for Resident Evil 4 that just dropped a couple of days ago, and I'm super stoked to play because I will take all of the Resident Evil 4 that Capcom will throw at me. Thank you very much. How are you staying spooky?
I also have been reading quite a bit of horror literature lately, which is a nice change of pace. Sometimes you look at a screen all day and it makes you go insane, so it's good to get back with a physical book. The book I just finished is The Last Days by Adam Neville. He also did The Ritual, The Reddening. He is a pretty prolific horror author. It's really good. I read it up camping and it got in my head a little bit, spooked me out. However, the ending is just not as good as the rest of the book. He takes some very weird turns and then takes a few more turns, and it started out as a really fascinating kind of found footage meets cult kind of Jonestown, sorry. And as you say, craps the bed. So
yeah, I agree. I really liked that book until the ending.
Yeah.
I'd say it's some of Neville's best writing.
I agree.
But
I agree. The writing was very beautiful. I had a hard time finishing it because I was kind of so bummed out.
I'll agree that I think it's worth, our listeners' time, if especially if you enjoy kind of cults. But yeah, it doesn't quite stick the landing. Which, if you know that going in, maybe you'll get more out of it.
I am about to start the horrific "Tender Is the Flesh" book, which I have heard is one of the most grotesque and vile horror books that have ever been written. So I will.
Oh yeah, me and our guest last episode talked about that ad nauseum. So
I will be reading, and I will tell you what I think, Nathaniel.
Yeah, get ready to want to throw up in your mouth for like 200 pages.
Yeah, a friend of mine read it up camping, and he finished it in a day. And he said that he has never read something quite like that. So here we go.
Yeah, just buckle up, because good heaven.
I'm excited. I love a good gross book.
Oh, it succeeds at that. Okay, well, I guess once again to our listeners, we love you.
You are amazing.
We appreciate you sticking with us for 100 episodes. And here's to the next 100. Stay spooky.
Stay spooky.